Well, we've got some bad news in the oil industry. Just when we thought we were bouncing back and recovery was unfolding, well, we thought that the oil industry would bounce back as well. Well, let's go back a little bit in history here, because the beginning of 2020 was the worst shock in the oil industry in its history. You think we went through the Gulf War with burning of oil fields, hurricanes, the BP oil disaster down the Gulf. I mean, all of those were nothing compared to what we saw. Think about the gas crisis in the late 70s under Jimmy Carter. None of that compares to what we went through at the beginning of this year. And the oil industry just collapsed. Some history here, no one was using it. No one was using oil, so the demand for oil crashed, right? Airplanes stopped, cars stopped, distribution of long-haul trucks stopped, distribution of all of that stuff ground to a halt. We're not driving to work. We didn't need oil anymore. And we knew that it would probably bounce back eventually, of course, because we'll all get back to work. We'll start flying again. It got so bad that American oil companies had no place left to store all of this oil. And so they started giving away barrels of oil, basically, for free. In fact, they were going to pay you to hold this oil because they had no place to hold it anymore. So they're giving you all of these barrels and barrels of oil for free. I mean, think about this. We joke about oil being black gold, right? It wasn't. It turned into like a hot potato. I don't want to touch this stuff. Negative oil prices for the very first time. That means they were paying people to take their oil. So much so that we had President Trump and the Federal Reserve, stepping in to say, you know what, we'll buy up as much of your oil as possible and we'll put it in our reserves. Remember the president?
Based on the record low price of oil that you've been seeing, it's at a level that's very interesting to a lot of people. We're filling up our national petroleum reserves, the strategic reserves, and we're looking to put as much as 75 million barrels into the reserves themselves. That would top it out. That would be first time in a long time it's been topped out. We'd get it for the right price.
So that sounded like good news, right? That we would reopen and, they're going to buy up all this oil and all of these oil jobs would be okay and the oil industry would be fine. Well, then reopening started to fall flat. And then you had, the Lake of the Ozarks people out there on Memorial Day, half naked, running around, hanging out in the pool and beaches and all those sorts of stuff. Casinos reopening. Now we're seeing spikes in cases across the country. I mean, look at this. This is 9 different states. We're seeing actually now we're upwards of about 19 states, but here are some of the top ones I showed. Arkansas, Arizona, North Carolina, Oklahoma with some spikes where the president is about to hold his rally. Oregon, South Carolina, Texas again, having huge issues in Texas. Florida having huge spikes. Utah as well. We may have to go under certain lockdowns again. And that's what led to this. Now we've got BP having to lay off 10,000 jobs as the demand for oil has plummeted. So what's going on here? Well, what's going on is that you now have fears over this virus, a second wave. So they are basically damned if you do, damned if you don't. Because oil production, here's the real pivotal piece of all of this. Oil production can't stop. They lease this land from people. They don't own the land. Very often they're leasing the land. And they can, under their lease agreement, they are not allowed to stop producing oil. If they stop producing oil on that land, guess what? The leaseholder can say, all right, I'm going to find a competitor to come in here and start producing oil on this land. So all of the oil companies can't stop. They just have to keep going. It's like that old I Love Lucy sketch where she just keeps eating the chocolate balls as they come off the conveyor belt. She doesn't know what to do with them, so she's shoving them in her mouth. That's exactly what this is like. At least that's the way I see it. My mind always goes to TV references. I was trying to think of a Seinfeld one, but I couldn't. Actually, I do. Remember when Kramer got a big barrel of oil and he brought it to his apartment? I forgot about that one. Anyway, he was going to build a bladder to protect oil liners, and that was his big genius idea, and he was going to drop it out of his apartment window. So anyway, there's always a Seinfeld reference somehow. It just takes me a moment to think of it. Nevertheless, these oil companies cannot stop producing. If they do, they lose their land. Well, now, like I said, BP laying off 10,000 people. Chief Executive Bernard Looney blamed the drop in oil price for the cuts. He sent an email out to his employees to say, the oil price has plunged well below the level we need to turn a profit. We are spending much, much more than we make. I am talking millions of dollars every day. That's pretty blunt. We're spending way more than we make. Something's got to give here, right? Now you have multiple companies filing for bankruptcy. So there were, we saw Whiting Petroleum step in and file for bankruptcy. A number of other oil companies are about to file for bankruptcy. I'll get to why this is important to you in just a moment here, but there are 4 things that happened from the federal government. Number 1, the Fed stepped in the CARES Act and gave millions of dollars to the oil industry in the CARES Act. But that was like a drop in the bucket. That was just a drop in a barrel, to be honest. Then number 2, we don't like bailouts, right? We don't like big corporate bailouts. And when American people find out that big businesses are being bailed out again and CEOs are getting big golden parachutes, we don't like it, right? Because you're not getting a stimulus check, you're not able to pay for your medication, and yet some big business that screwed up and poured billions of gallons of oil into the Gulf of Mexico is going to get bailed out by the federal government? Are you kidding? So they don't do bailouts, they couch it a different way. They kind of hide it. They kind of hide it so we don't know that it's a bailout. So what they did was instead, under the Main Street bailout program from the Federal Reserve, they would basically cap these things at about 10,000 employees. You weren't able to really take advantage of these programs, these loan programs from the Fed, if you were capped at about 10,000 employees or more. But a lot of these oil companies had 15 and 20,000 employees. So the Fed just recently adjusted it to make it available for oil companies up to 15,000 employees so that they are able to get access to this capital from the Federal Reserve. And then, of course, you have President Trump saying, we'll buy the oil. We'll buy all your oil and we'll put it in our reserves. Then he also threatened tariffs so that you have to buy American oil to help the American businesses. So all of those things sound great, right? However, it's not enough. So oil is caught in this like catch-22 because, did you ever read that book, Catch-22? It's an amazing book. But they're in trouble if they don't get back to work and we start using gas and oil again. But they're also in trouble if they go too fast and a second wave of coronavirus comes and hits us. So again, catch-22. If we go too fast and then we have to shut down again, it would destroy the oil industry. Absolutely destroy the oil industry. And if we get back to work, if we start burning and churning again and we're back to work, we're still in trouble. So they are really in a bind right now in the oil industry. Why is this important? Well, it's important for you because if you have oil stocks or if you invest in what was always supposed to be the safe investment is in energy, keeping your money in ETFs and these other things that are backed by oil, you should know that these things are dangerous. Goldman Sachs, in another report, looked at oil and said that they're already thinking a big decline is underway, an additional 20% decline. So if your 401k in any kind of way is tied to oil or gas, you really better pay attention to this. One of the big issues here is that these oil stocks and why they started going back up just a few weeks ago is because guess what? They had a fake recovery built into them. So the stock started going up because they had basically a premonition about recovery that was baked into the value of the stock. So if you bought oil, you were buying a stock that was thinking it would get better in a few weeks or months. Which, to be fair, we all thought, right? People are going to start driving again. It's not really happening. Not by much. Planes are barely flying. I showed you the statistics yesterday. Showed airline industry, people are not flying. Very few right now. So they had this baked in fake number inside the value. And now once we find out that BP has to lay off 10,000 employees and more of these companies are going to go bankrupt, these stocks started tanking again. And Goldman Sachs sees another 20% correction in these stocks. So again, if your retirement funds are somehow tied to this, you better be careful. This is an opportunity, though, I think, to look at green stocks. If you are an investor in the stock market, or you look at these companies where I've seen commercials left and right now for solar. I'm seeing billboards all over the place for solar so that we don't have to rely on this oil. And I think it's certainly the future, green technology, if you're doing it correctly, for buying things that will enable us to have our house be sustained through a pandemic, through a hurricane, or through something else where electricity is shut off, where we have access to solar power. So those stocks are, starting to look pretty healthy right now. But again, if you're tied to, the oil industry for your 401k or any part of your major portfolio, you really better pay attention to what's going on there. Maybe that's why your portfolio has declined so much. So it also means for you really low gas prices. I don't see gas prices going up anytime soon. So now is an opportunity to make sure you go out and fill up your car, save some money on that. That's a positive news as well. Again, green being a great play in all of this, green energy if you're an investor.